Arizona's economy is taking baby steps, moving away from a double-dip recession.
I'm not seeing anything in the numbers that point me to the direction of things getting worse. I mean, the losses are getting fewer, overall the economic environment is improving.
If Murthy sounds tentative, perhaps it's because economic development efforts aren't yet seen as the whole package.
You can't just do great economic development and have low, a tax-friendly business tax rate. It's about infrastructure, it's about education, it's about skilled workforces.
Tonight on Arizona Week, job growth remains sluggish but is moving in the right direction, and how politicians use the economic discussion for their own purposes.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support. Once again, your moderator, Michael Chiha.
2 steps forward and 1 back. That's the economy in Arizona and across the nation. July unemployment figures for the state and the nation show that pattern, moving up 1 notch from 8.2 to 8.3%. Here's state economist Aruna Murthy, under whose direction the state figures are compiled. The July unemployment rate went up just a tick, but there was good news behind that. Could you tell us about it?
The unemployment rate went up a bit, but if you read into it, it's essentially flat because it was only 1/10 of a point that went up. The good news, what you ask, is about the trends that we are seeing. This is the 5 months in a row that the private sector over-the-year growth has gone up. So the number for July was 2.6% over-the-year growth in the private sector. And we have seen this month after month for the past 5 months, it being above 2%.
And you also said that July is typically a month when we see losses in jobs in Arizona because of seasonality. Is that correct?
That's right. And we did see those. July is typically a month of losses, and we did see losses in this July as well. But what differentiated this July was some of the losses in the private sector lower than what we have seen historically. But in the government sector, the losses were in local public education.
And that was because of teachers being out of work for the summer, largely?
That's right. Cut back in not just the teachers, just in the overall the school system shutting down because of summer break.
Overall, based on the numbers that you're talking about, are we seeing improvement in the economy and moving away from the threat of another recession?
At least for Arizona, I'm pretty confident. I'm not seeing anything in the numbers that point me to the direction of things getting worse. I mean, the losses are getting fewer. Overall the economic environment is improving. Certainly, the talk around the nation, right? We don't see the growth rate as being that high in terms of employment, but there's nothing that we saw during the recession where month after month we saw declines in employment, and we are not seeing that.
One thing we did see in the numbers that you released was a reduction in the size of the labor pool in Arizona by about 24,400 workers year over.
That's right.
Fewer people out there either working or seeking work. What explains that?
This has been a trend that we are observing for the nation as well as Arizona, and it's been happening for the past few years where the labor force is declining and the labor force participation rate across various age groups is declining. Partly it has to do with the baby boomers aging, right? And some of it has to do with the current economic environment where people are leaving the labor force because either they are discouraged and cannot find a job or, going back to school or something else.
What are the most important sectors in Arizona and how are you seeing those perform right now for the month of July?
Most of the sectors actually in Arizona, with the exception of manufacturing, are doing better than the nation overall. This I'm talking about over-the-year growth rate in employment. Healthcare sector, I think it's at over 7%. Construction sector is over 7%. Healthcare is higher than the U.S. Leisure and hospitality growth is higher than the U.S. So a lot of the traditional sectors that have done well for Arizona are doing better than the U.S.
Now, you also said in your press conference that you think there's a possibility that Arizona will beat the job growth forecast that you made at the beginning of the year, which was 2% job growth for the year.
Right now, if you look at the growth rate, this month was 2.4, and if you average it out for the year, it's about 1.9. And we had forecasted 2%. So we still have 5 more months, and generally in the latter part of the year, Arizona gains jobs. That's been seen historically. So if we do better, then certainly I think we should be able to beat the forecast.
What explains the fact that Arizona is outperforming the nation when it comes to job growth, especially in these key sectors? Is it typical of us, and is it our population growth?
It is the way the sectors are distributed. I mean, there's a leisure and hospitality is a big sector for Arizona. People from around the world come to see Grand Canyon, and it's a beautiful state. So we do have a lot of visitors. In addition to just tourism, we also have winter visitors from Canada and the other cold places in the country. So all that contributes to more services needed to address that population, and essentially those sectors tend to do well when we have those numbers go up.
A really important sector, not only in Arizona but nationally, is retail. And you're showing more growth in retail job additions in Arizona than what the national trend is. Can you talk about that a little bit? Retail
has always been an important sector for Arizona, and the retail, the numbers are going up. People, I mean, they have not spent for a long time, so everything needs to be bought, right? I mean, right from car to our everyday needs, people are using the retail sector for. So I think that sector is showing a promise, and it's just essentially reflecting what the economy is doing. Things are getting better in the economy, and we are seeing improvement in the retail sector.
And then why would it be outstripping what the national growth in retail is? Is there less certainty nationally than maybe in Arizona? Or is it more pent-up demand in Arizona?
It's a function of disposable income. Maybe the other things cost less in Arizona compared to the nation overall, so you have more disposable income. I mean, even if you just take the gas prices, they are more gas is expensive in California compared to Arizona. So maybe the $2 people spend. It's hard to say, but it's always been a sector where it's outperformed the national average.
And then let's touch on the construction industry as well, because it's extremely important in Arizona and has been historically. Seeing a lot of growth there, as you mentioned, 7% year over. But that's a rebound from a very low base at this point. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, it is a rebound from a very low base, but right now, whatever little construction that can happen is happening, right? I mean, there's a big demand for homes. There are not enough homes in the market and there are more buyers essentially in that particular sector. So we are finding that particular sector is growing in terms of employment. But certainly the base is low, so the percent-wise it looks way higher.
So overall assessment, 8.3% unemployment for Arizona in July, up just a tad from June, but a good picture behind that number.
Certainly. I mean, I won't read too much into that small increase in unemployment rate. And the sample size to calculate unemployment rate for Arizona is really small. It's only 1,000 households. So, I'd rather pay more emphasis to my other numbers than just unemployment rate.
For further discussion of the state's economic performance, I spoke with Dennis Hoffman, an Arizona State University economist. The unemployment report is out for July, 8.3% in Arizona. Is that statistic in and of itself an indicator of larger things going on in our economy?
Unemployment is a real popular measure of the health of the labor market. Some of us worry, especially at smaller and smaller geographies. So, for example, if you go around our state and there's data on unemployment by relatively small geographies, those numbers, I think, have wider and wider margins of error. So the national numbers are pretty accurate measure, I think. As you go to the individual states, it gets a bit less accurate. But trends in that number, I think, are important. And what I take out of this is not month-to-month small movements, it's movements over the year. And the movements have been very good in the downward direction over the last year.
In this statistic, or perhaps other economic indicators that you follow or track or even create through your research, do you see a reinvention of Arizona's economy or perhaps a diversification in the economy that needs to be occurring?
Well, there's signs of change. First of all, we have a very active, well-coordinated effort on recruitment led by the Arizona Commerce Authority, and they've been really quite successful, I think, over the last couple of years. And so they're bringing some diversity in terms of businesses into the state. Businesses are no longer seeking out Arizona just to serve our rampant population growth because, of course, population growth has been fairly slow. And so, therefore, businesses are seeking us out, to put facilities in place to leverage the skills and advantages that our workforce has. So we're making some steps toward diversity. You can't just do great economic development and have low, a tax-friendly business tax rate. It's about infrastructure, it's about education, it's about skilled workforces. And it's a real simple logic. Businesses want to come here and make money. And so taxes are important, and being courted and coordinated recruitment, that's all key, but they're not going to come here unless they can figure out that the market's lucrative to sell into, or you've got innovative, productive, educated workforce, you've got a transportation, communication, healthcare, education infrastructure that supports business growth. All of those are pieces of the puzzle. The people just simply have to understand, if we're going to be among the nation's leaders in population growth, say over the decade, not over the last 5 years, which has been pretty slow, but historically we've been among the nation's leader in population growth, we're going to be quite reliant on construction just because of the arithmetic of that basic fact. And I think that some of the recent signs are suggesting the real estate is certainly stabilizing, that the construction engine is coming back. The interesting thing from the labor market perspective is how is that being reinvented, because their access in the construction industry to undocumented labor, which was pretty easy for them historically, is no longer easy. So that entire labor market churn will have to sort itself out. But I think construction will clearly again play a role in our expansion.
You mentioned undocumented. I want to take off on that a little bit with a question about the DREAM Act.
Sure.
Or those who are getting deferred deportation now as we speak.
Right.
There are some who are critical of that process because that makes them eligible to work.
Right.
What will that add to the unemployment problem in Arizona?
To the measure or to the actual problem, it really won't change things all that much. And the reason I make that case is these are folks that already are in our unemployment statistics now. The unemployment statistics don't make a distinction between legal worker or undocumented worker. These are people that are actively seeking employment at the time that the surveys are taken. So what I see is a situation now where a group of these unemployed people that was heretofore facing the barriers that all young, semi-skilled and relatively low-skilled people, and not only these folks are low-skilled, by the way, some of them have significant skills, but younger, untenured, unseasoned workers have more challenges in the labor force. So they face those challenges. And before the action yesterday, they also, of course, faced the challenge that it wasn't legal for them to work, and now there's a pathway.
The unemployment rate and other economic indicators are often seized upon by politicians seeking to spin them to their advantage. But are they getting economics right? I asked Hoffman for his take. Politicians, in the general sense, seize upon a statistic like the unemployment rate,
right,
and use it for their political advantage or try to bend it to their political advantage. As an economist, do you see value in that, or is there a falsehood about it?
Well, You know, I think certainly over my lifetime, I remember discussions, and you probably do as well, about the misery index, which was the sum of the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. And it might have even been Jimmy Carter that first invented this phrase in the mid-'70s, pointing to the bad numbers on the misery index.
To his demise.
Yeah, unfortunately for him, they were even worse when he went to run for a re-election. So, you know, inflation has negative consequences for an economy. Unemployment and idle resources have negative consequences for an economy. If politicians want to bring forward constructive solutions to economic problems, you know, they can point to the unemployment rate as a sign of a problem and then offer a constructive solution.
In the general sense, do politicians get it right when they talk about the economy? Are they speaking economic intelligence?
Well, I think the real challenge there is the success of a particular presidency as measured by, say, job growth or unemployment rate declines is often kind of a matter of history as opposed to the direct consequence of any particular policy that's been put in place. So I guess I kind of pull back when I hear the phrase, you know, candidate X or President X or whatever created so many jobs during their particular tenure. And I would say either Mr. Reagan or Mr. Clinton, to be kind of be balanced here. I'd have kind of the same kind of concerns. You can point to the success or challenges that economy faces for reasons that are far beyond any particular presidential policy.
So are you saying that any politician, even the president, has a limited influence on the economy that's much more limited than what they tend to like us to think, and frankly what we in the media tend to lead the public to think?
Right. Now, they play a role. They could set a course for policy. I think some of the signals that we heard from Mr. Reagan clearly played a role. Some of the signals that we got from Mr. Clinton clearly played a role. It was my own view, frankly, 4 years ago, that had either Mr. McCain or Mr. Obama been elected president in 2008, that the next 4 years were going to be really, really challenging. And I think it's obvious. But there's relatively little patience, I think, in the media, certainly in the political realm, for going 4 years and seeing very little improvement in the economy. I think that we face massive challenges then. I think whoever is elected this time, I would venture to say the next 4 years, and maybe that's just because the last 4 have been so bad, but the next 4 years, we're going to be improving as an economy. And whoever is in office will claim credit for that improvement.
Again, as an economist, what would you see a politician saying, a presidential candidate specifically, that would be more assuring to you that that person was on the right track with economic policy?
Well, what I'd like to hear, if I want to craft my ideal candidate, I'd like to hear rhetoric, frankly, that would probably guarantee they wouldn't get elected. Because, I do think that we face some significant challenges, and on the budget, for example, and on debt, we do face challenges that require addressing both the expenditure side and the revenue side simultaneously. And what, of course, you hear from the candidates is, the fix really has to be on one of those depending upon their political preferences. If you drill into the Simpson-Bowles recommendations from the President's Commission, which, never really got anywhere, there were a lot of remedies both on expenditure cuts, and there certainly were some revenue enhancement measures as well. This economy functioned pretty well back in the 60s and 70s was a tough decade because of the oil shocks that we incurred. But we had a pretty good run in the post-war period. without relying on historically low tax rates, without relying on accelerating expenditures that have pushed the debt to GDP ratio up to these stratospheric levels. And, we kind of got to get back to those basics. We got to get back to policies that allow this economy to have nominal growth rates that are more similar to what we've observed historically.
Have you heard anything from either of the two leading candidates, the Democrat and the Republican, Obama and Romney, that would lead you to think that we could be on a path to those?
Well, what concerns me is I've heard from both camps some things that I think could help, but I would like to package those together into a program that would, reflect some compromise between those two positions. And frankly, that's what I'm not. That's the worry. And that's everybody's worry. I think that's kind of nonpartisan, that seems to be just very, very little room for compromise now, which is unfortunate. It's hard to see a way through this without compromise.
Will we see compromise on economic issues? To analyze how the political economic discussion is going, AZPM political correspondent Andrea Kelly joins me. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
So will there be compromise? Are you hearing anything in the presidential campaign or the U.S. Senate or congressional campaigns here in Arizona that hints that there will be any kind of compromise on the economy?
Well, it's interesting. We often hear candidates talking about compromise, especially in our federal races. We hear candidates for U.S. House, U.S. Senate talking about what Congress needs is for both sides to come together, to compromise on things, to agree on things, to put aside some of the partisan differences. We hear that in every forum from every candidate. But when you actually hear them talk about the issues that they feel strongly about, the important issues that they think matter to Arizonans and Americans right now, their policy positions do not have compromise in them. They are very solidly left or right, differing, and you don't hear a lot of people coming to the middle when they actually talk about their policy issues. So we are hearing about it, but I'm not sure we will be seeing it.
And we are hearing the candidates talk about the economy quite a bit and job growth and getting the government out of the way. What's the fundamental difference between the Republican position and the Democratic position? Because it's pretty clear.
That's true. And you're right. Everybody is talking about jobs and the economy and how to get the economy going again. The real big difference we hear is that Republicans are often talking about eliminating some of the government regulations and private regulations on the private sector. They would like to see smaller government, obviously, which means less regulation to them, while Democrats feel that the government has a role in jumpstarting the economy. That's where that big divide lies, is how much the government should be involved in the economy in the first place, and going forward, how will the people who are elected handle that?
And Thursday night, there was a forum broadcast here on AZPM, the U.S. Senate Republican candidates, and we have a couple of excerpts from that we want to show you that lay out the basic positions of the two leading candidates, Jeff Flake and Will Cardin.
We have a $16 trillion debt, and we're adding to that debt about $1.2 trillion every year. We've got to have somebody who's ready to go back to Washington and to stand up for fiscal discipline, regardless of which party is in power. I've had that record in the House, and that's the record that I'll take to the Senate.
I've spent the last 20 years raising a family and building businesses. And that's what I think we need right now in Washington, D.C., are more people from the real world. People who've actually balanced budgets, who've made payrolls, who understand what it's like to live within the means that you're given.
So there we hear Flake talking about his Washington experience, but Cardin talking about his business experience. And in a campaign that focuses on economic issues, does that give Cardin any kind of an edge?
Well, I think it really is going to come down to what voters value. I think you could make the argument either way, that having Washington experience prepares you to deal with the realities that are Washington politics, but having real-world business experience might prepare you for balancing a budget in a different way than Washington has been. So I think it's really come down to voter values and which they think is the better position going forward in looking at the next several years of budgets in Congress.
And then in the same forum, the two candidates talked in a little more specific terms about economic issues, and here's what they had to say in that regard.
If we can have the right leadership in Washington that can establish a conducive tax and regulatory environment, and let the private sector and local organizations and communities do the rest. That's what we need.
We have an economy in Arizona that is the worst it's been since the Great Depression. I think if you're going to understand the economy and understand what's going on, you actually have to have experienced it. There's value in experience in private sector and not just preaching about the private sector. I believe right now I have the best skill set in order to make the economy better for the Arizona people, and that's why I'd like to go to Washington, D.C.
Again, not very many details from either of them about what they would do to improve the economy, but Cardin, again, pushing his business experience. Again, does that trump Flake's congressional experience?
I think that's something we're going to have to wait till August 28th to find out when voters go to the polls here in Arizona, those who didn't vote early already, and see which one they really value more, because I do think that is a big feature in that specific race, their very different experience up to now.
And we have about a minute remaining, Andrea, and in that time, talk to us about what happens once the primary is over. One of them will be the winner and face Richard Carmona, a Democrat who doesn't have a whole lot of business experience himself, a little bit in the nonprofit sector. What will be the dynamic there?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the party positions on the economy and what happens going forward there. Because I think, as you said, Richard Carmona, the Democrat running for Senate, he's not the Will Cardin of the other side. He's not long-term private sector experience. He's not exactly the Jeff Flake of the other side either. He has government experience, but it's not elected government experience in the same way. So we'll see how that sets up after the primary.
Andrea, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
A link to the state's July unemployment report and more information on Arizona's economy is on our website, azpm.org. That's our program for Friday, August 17th, 2012. Next Friday, we'll handicap the legislative races in the primary election that's just 11 days away. For Arizona Week, I'm Michael Chihak.
Production of Arizona Week is made possible in parts by a grant from the Stonewall Foundation and by the members of Arizona Public Media. Thank you for your continued support.